geologist by day and a spooky geologist by night.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. So, what got you into that, first of all?
So, I've always been interested in paranormal topics and being a scientist, natural science, I always love. So, animals, the atmosphere, weather, rocks, things like that. I always liked. So, you learn geology, but yet you're still interested in paranormal ideas. And nobody ever went to that intersection between what do people think about the landscape and the planet in terms of folklore or scary things that happen or related to explanations that people have about paranormal events. So I started looking into that, and the topics are endless.
Mhm.
I mean, I almost didn't know where to begin. I ended up beginning with something that was really interesting to me, which was the stone tape theory, which was used a lot by paranormal investigators to explain residual hauntings of ghosts, so things that repeat all the time. And they were supposing that maybe the energy released at the time of this traumatic event that created the ghosts ended up being trapped in the rock and replayed to certain people who were receptive to that wavelength or frequency or whatever they wanted to call it. And I'm like, you know what? I wonder if they ever asked a geologist about that. And turned out they didn't. So I did a real deep dive into that and realized that is spooky geology right there.
Mhm.
And then there's just a whole lot of topics that are similar to that, scary places that are related to potentially the environment or the surroundings or the features in the landscape. So that's kind of my little niche right there,
Mhm.
that intersection.
So, how much truth is there to that? Because I grew up watching Goosebumps, and a lot of these episodes where you have a family, they move into this house
Yeah.
where something might have happened, and then they start getting all of these experiences. So it's almost like the land remembers, or
Hmm.
the building where you move into remembers the history of what
Exactly.
has happened there. So how much truth is there to that?
None. But it's so popular and it feels right to say that there's something local that's trapping that experience to be replayed to the next person who comes around. So a version of the stone tape idea where you're not capturing the paranormal energy, for lack of a better term, in the rock or the bridge or the stone building or something like that, which is how it was originally um, uh, portrayed in actually fiction, but people picked up on that. But it had antecedents where people talked about what if it was trapped in water vapor or the air in the environment or part of the into nature itself, or if you go back even farther or just on a tangent, what if it was trapped in a piece of jewelry, an article of clothing? Um, so then you get the idea of psychometry. Somebody who has this special ability could hold, say, a watch and hold it and then get the vibes of whoever owned that watch before or whatever happened to that item in its past associated with the person, and they would do a psychic reading based on that. So that's where it's all related to this idea of psychometry, that an object holds some sort of memory or event or energy that gets played back. So the stone tape is actually the same thing. That's where it comes from, is the idea of psychometry. But T.C. Lethbridge was a popular paranormalist back in the day, several decades ago. He's deceased now. He came up with these types of ideas that how can we explain ghosts? How can we explain haunted places? And maybe this was it. The technology was, not at the time you can actually measure these things, but he suspected that maybe the environment was holding these recordings and playing them back. So once
Really?
you actually look into it, there's no mechanism for that to be held in the environment,
Mhm.
whether it be nails in the building, which has come up before. The nails, the iron in the nails, rust holds the memories of a place, and then a family moves in, maybe remodels the house, and then reactivates that energy to be released. There's no evidence for that, and there's no way to record it in the environment.
So people just like to believe such stories.
It sounds sciencey, doesn't it? It sounds
Yes.
plausible.
Yeah, because there's another theory that I came across, which is it's called the invisible string theory that talks about the connection between two people. And then I looked into it and I'm like, yeah, there's no real scientific
Right.
theory to it. It's just like a pop fiction theory, you could say,
Yeah.
poetic theory. So that's almost like what this sounds like. There's really no scientific
Right.
theory there.
No, but imagine that, the average person doesn't know a lot about physics or about chemistry or science in general. And when they're given something by someone who speaks like they know what they're talking about, and it feels credible and it sounds plausible, but they don't know maybe the math behind it, they, they find it easy to believe. They're not going to go and check on it. They maybe can't check on it. It's not real easy to go and actually do the calculations yourself or dig into the books and the papers to see if this actually makes sense. So across our society now, if you come off as sounding sciency and you sound credible, people will believe you. That's kind of what I wrote a book on it called Scientifical Americans. So it was easy for regular people to believe things that sounded like they should be true or sounded credible or valid because they would not be able to find out if it was or not.
So that's AI in a nutshell.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really dangerous not doing your own research. And I know that sounds, I mean, crazy now because doing your own research, you're just reading what someone else wrote online, and you don't even know if that person even is even credible. But really finding different sources and seeing if they all match to the same theory line, I guess. Uh, s- so there's really no science behind what you just said, but why do people believe this? Is it just because they want to believe in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're looking for explanations that they could either tell themselves or tell other people, especially if they're out in a media role that they're trying to sell on a TV show or a book or whatever. Um, they're trying to be experts in things, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, we rely on experts in our society. We can't always do our own research on everything. We go to the doctors. We hope that the doctors are up on the latest science, things that are established knowledge that we know has been tested and is reliable. We go to the car mechanic because that they're experts in that thing and we trust that they know what they're doing. So we can't be experts in everything. So you have to trust people to know what they're talking about. But when you're dealing with an unexplained thing like, something you see in the sky or a ghostly experience you had or something that happened to you, you wake up at night and you're paralyzed. You don't really know what the possible explanations are. So if somebody who calls himself an expert tells you that thing, our society is kind of, that's the way we work. We look for those experts and we believe them. And that can be a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, so there's this other thing. I don't even know what the name of it is, but I'll just go ahead and say the lab coat theory. I don't even know if that is the name, but it's that you give a lot of trust into someone's role. If they have like an authority role, you give a lot of trust to that
Right.
person. So you believe everything that they say.
This is weird because I think, yes, we do that. But if you look at current society now, there's a really big problem with trusting authority right now, especially
Mhm.
government authority. Maybe we don't like doctors because we think that they're trying to make money or they're trying to keep us sick, which is, I don't believe that, but some people do. There's a prevalence of conspiracy theories that everything has a background reason, not the one that's out on the surface. So there really feels to me that there's a deep distrust now in society for members of authority. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it's education or, we've had some bad examples where authority figures have failed us.
Mhm.
And there were real conspiracies. They were outed, but who knows, which ones have not been outed. But I get the impression that people are just they don't know what to believe anymore.
Mhm.
So they're going to go out and have their own experiences and do their own research and decide in the marketplace of ideas, which we have all over the internet right now, which one sounds the most comfortable to them.
Mhm. And that's also dangerous because if you put math together, it could always make sense. Even something that is not real could make sense to somebody.
You're always going to find an expert in
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
If you look, there's going to be
Mhm.
somebody.
And it's interesting now because it's like we know that the government hides certain things as opposed to say 50 years ago that it was hard to prove that. So
Mhm.
if you came out as a conspiracy theorist even like 20 years ago, you'd just look crazy. But
Yeah,
in these recent years, we've come to find out that the government does hide certain information. uh, Aliens may be one of those things that they've hidden, but we know that there are people that hold onto information, like they gatekeep information, so that leaves
sure.
other people wondering, maybe this is real. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the government they can't be transparent to 100%. There's things that
mhm,
have to be kept back. And there's things that, maybe we just haven't figured out yet. We don't know where to look. Um, if you're just an average person, I guess that the best advice is to just look at as many credible sources as you can. Look at more than one. Question your ideas. Don't just be stuck on one idea. And like, look what people are saying on the opposite side of that idea. And which one makes more sense? Now, for me, growing up, I believed a lot of paranormal stuff. When I started looking at the skeptical literature, it actually made more sense to me. There's not a lot of evidence for these things in a scientific sense of the word, and to me that mattered. If over 60 years later we still have no better evidence of Bigfoot, there's a real good chance there isn't a Bigfoot out
mhm,
there like people describe. I mean, people are having experiences, and I don't know what kind of experiences they're having, but to say that it's an undiscovered large ape like creature, we really don't have the evidence to point to that. So, people are still going to be out there searching for an answer that feels good to them.
mhm.
But yeah, you really have to think about what are they saying on the other side of that argument, because you really don't know the argument unless you know all those sides, and that's when you should then make your decision about what you think.
Yeah, yeah. Bigfoot actually has never really made sense to me because I don't know if there are more photos of Bigfoot, but the most popular one, you have this, let's just say, animal or whatever it is, looking directly at the camera, and it almost seems like that's the only photo there is. That it's just such a perfect pose of this animal looking straight at the camera, and now everyone has these experiences and opinions on Bigfoot. But yeah, there are certain stories like that that have never really made sense to me. Now, when we talk about the Bermuda Triangle, that's another story that did make sense to me for a while, but then there's just so many other factors
All
that
right.
uh, could basically tell the story of a certain legend like that.
Sure. And you want to look at each individual case. And it's
Mm,
difficult because people see the collective. Oh, there's all these stories that are about this topic. When you start looking at the stories individually, they often fall apart. But people don't see, they don't dig into those stories, or they don't question them. And it's understandable, because if somebody tells you a story, it's kind of rude to say, I don't believe you. I think you're making stuff up or whatever. And it's not. People often say, well, do you think everybody is lying? No, I don't think everybody is lying about, let's say, Bigfoot. I think they've had an experience, but I can't say what they've experienced. Could be a number of things. Could be things we don't even imagine yet. Let's pause on Bigfoot for a second, because you mentioned the canonical Bigfoot image, that iconic image of it's called Patty. That's Bigfoot's name, because it's a female. And so that came from the Patterson-Gimlin film, which was taken in 1968 and publicized. And at the moment, there's a documentary that has been shown at South by Southwest and is now in the process of being distributed, getting a distributor to show worldwide. That film is absolutely a hoax. That's what it claims, because it shows the evidence that it was a hoax. Now, that iconic idea of Bigfoot is what everybody imagines it looks like. So that's what they describe it as when they feel that they've had this type of encounter, although there is quite a bit of variation. The same as with that iconic image of the Loch Ness Monster. The one, the ripples in the head that looks like a snake, it's coming out of the water. That's also been debunked a long time ago. That's not a real photograph. That's a device that they put in the water. But so many people base their interest and the kernel of their belief on that thing. And now that thing's been debunked, what happens? They shift. They say, well, okay, that piece of evidence might not be any good now. That's a hoax. But it doesn't discount all the bodies of stories. And again, they start looking at that collectively together, and it looks real impressive. But actually, it's not. Stories are not great evidence, unless you're really digging into them and you're the detective and you're going in to look at all the confirmation of the facts. We've seen that with UFO incidents that have been proven to be a hoax. Sometimes people I don't believe it's a hoax. I think it's a cover up that it's a hoax. It's real, but you're just saying it's a hoax. So it's really, really tricky with things in the paranormal. Have we discovered anything new in the paranormal? No, we really haven't, because people are thinking of it more as a belief, and a belief they probably don't want to give up too easily. They're going to twist themselves into pretzels in order to continue to believe what they prefer. If that makes any sense.
Right, because people are just going to be stuck in their ways no matter the information that you give them, right? They're just going to be stuck on believing what they want to believe.
It depends. I mean, some people are willing to change their minds. I think we're seeing that right now with the Bigfoot situation. Some Bigfoot researchers saying, well, this absolutely is a hoax now that we've seen this evidence. I mean, they may not be giving up their belief in Bigfoot totally, but it has cracked the foundation, and maybe it affects the people coming for us for this subject in the future. They're just not going to buy into it because that foundation has been cracked. So it's interesting to see if people can keep an open mind and take in this new evidence and change their minds.
Yeah. So when it comes to stories like that, which is your favorite one?
I don't have a favorite. I have lots of. I'm interested in what stories people tell to a degree, because some of them are really creative, and I don't think they're lying. And I wonder what really happened to them. So I can't say I wasn't there, and our memory is really fallible.
Yeah.
When we have experiences, especially scary experiences, our bodies don't pick up all the details because we're scared, we're stressed, we're concerned about our own well-being. We're not focusing on what the thing looked like exactly. So you can't really go by the details of those things. And then as you keep telling the story, your brain is recreating that memory every time, and maybe a little bit differently. So we're never going to get the story like it was the moment that it happened. It's going to keep changing. So we can't really rely on human memory. It's not what our memory was meant to be. It's not a tape recorder. It's not, videotape. It doesn't work like that. it's meant for very general usage, and it works pretty
Yeah.
good for the most part. But if we're trying to investigate something that nature currently says doesn't exist, stories aren't really the way to do it. We need
Mhm.
better evidence than that. We're just not getting it.
And even with all the rising technology now, we still have the
Yeah.
same evidence, right?
Yeah. Why is that? Why do we not? We have game cameras. We have, high tech trail cameras and drones and FLIR and devices that can see where we can't see. And the evidence just isn't great. Now there is some. I mean, there are some things that have come out that are interesting. You just want to have evidence that all points to the same conclusion. Different lines of evidence independently should point to the real cause. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing, oh well, this piece of evidence looks really cool. Well, why aren't the people around there also experiencing this thing? Why aren't we finding traces of this creature that you say is there, physical traces of things? We're not doing that. People are coming up with more creative ideas to explain it, like portals and other dimensions and things like that. And that's not really getting us anywhere.
Hmm. And has there been like any creatures that went from being just a myth to being real?
So that's a tricky question. And cryptozoologists like to trot this one out that, oh, the giant panda or the mountain gorilla or the platypus or the Komodo dragon or all these animals that weren't that did start with myths. The white guy came to the new land and asked the people, what kind of animals you got around here? And I said, well, we got this big thing. No, you don't. That's ridiculous. That thing doesn't exist. That sounds really monstrous or bizarre, and they didn't believe them, and then they ended up catching the thing or finding evidence of the thing. But in those days we didn't know the world very well, and the world
Mm.
was written in terms of the white Western person, man,
Mhm.
usually. And so it's the 21st century now, though. So and cryptozoology just came into being in the 1950s, and by that time colonialism was already shutting down, and the world was becoming more known, and science was well established. And since then, the idea of cryptids becoming real has not been successful.
Mhm.
It's not a system that works. We're not seeing. Sure, there are large animals out there, relatively large animals. I mean, usually it's mouse size or
Mhm.
insect size that are being found all the time. Fish, frogs, uh, lots of insects, other arthropods, lots of animals and plants. New species are being found every day, every year, hundreds. But they're not cryptids. They're not.
Mhm.
They're not the things that people created as myths and became real animals. If we want to talk about something like the let's say a dragon, the idea of a dragon, it was common in many cultures. And Chinese had their dragons. Europe had their idea of dragons. They were more like worms. But across the world, lots of people had ideas of dragons. Um, did we ever find one creature that was a dragon? No, but we found a lot of things that kind of had those characteristics and bits and
Mhm.
pieces of them, like maybe really large birds or very large snakes or lizards or things like that, big cats. But nothing was really a dragon. So humans' ability to create cool creatures has always been. We can always use our imagination to create cool things in our minds. And it's got pieces of the natural world in it.
Mhm.
But to say that that was one animal that went from myth to reality, it's not linear. It doesn't work that way.
So what separates a cryptid to something that might be real, like an animal that they discovered? Like, what separates that?
Yeah, that's it, and it's tricky because the definition when the field of cryptozoology was established, the word cryptid came quite a bit later because they didn't want to talk about monsters anymore. They wanted something that signified an animal that people talked about or said existed, but hadn't been recognized by science yet. So since then, it's kind of a long trip from the idea of cryptozoology as a branch of zoology, where it never really achieved that. And it fell, and it became a very pop culture idea of something sentient that people say exists, but isn't actually proven by science. So now you have cryptids, the common use of the term, explaining or being used for things like the dog man, which is a popular cryptid these days, or the Fresno nightcrawler, which is kind of like a walking pair of pants that people thought was an alien. So all these bizarre creatures that used to be folklore stories, maybe lumberjack stories that they would tell, just for entertainment. Now people are calling those cryptids. They clearly don't exist. They're clearly imaginary and fictional creatures, but people love them anyway, and they love the idea of them.
Yeah.
So if a true cryptid, I guess, if you could use that term, and I'm using that really loosely, is an animal that potentially people say existed, but can be discovered and then classified as a real animal and fit into our, evolutionary tree of our evolutionary sense of nature. That isn't really happening. Cryptozoologists like to use things like, the coelacanth, right? The coelacanth being this really big fish that they thought was extinct for 60 million years, and they ended up finding one in Madagascar in the 1920s. Oh, that's a classic cryptid. No, it really wasn't, because the natives may have known about the fish, but they weren't really talking about it. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a legend. They were just like, yeah, we have this really big oily fish. And they're like, okay, whatever, could be anything. And then they find one and give it to the scientists, and they're just astounded. And then eventually, decades later, it's called a cryptid success story. It really wasn't. Just because it was there and we didn't know about it doesn't make it a cryptid. And unfortunately, a lot of people these days will look at any new discovered animal and say, look, if we could find that thing, maybe Bigfoot's still out there. Not the same. Apples, not even apples and oranges. I mean, apples and helicopters, completely different.
Right. Is it always animals though? Or could it also be like...
It could be plants.
Okay.
It could be plants. There is like cryptobotany. Some people like to think that there are still really bizarre, like man-eating plants out there in the jungle somewhere, because there were stories about plants that could eat people. We've never really found that either. But again, that's possible too, not as popular. The modern use of cryptid is very vernacular now. So it's like, my cat is a cryptid because I think he lives here, but I never see him, right? It's become very, very generalized, the idea of cryptid being any sentient-like thing. I've even heard, there was one great example of them calling this weird old soda machine a cryptid because it was in like an out of the way place, and it had really old labels, and somebody was putting like old bottles in it. And it was like, does this thing really exist? Because here's a picture of it, but I don't know if it's real. Does it really exist? It's a cryptid machine. Wow. People are creative with their language.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What about skinwalkers?
Yeah. So people will call them a cryptid, and they're really handy because they could morph, right? They could be one thing and turn into another. So the skinwalker idea is culturally appropriated, which is kind of awful. We don't like to use it because it's not ours to use. And the legend is that that's a witchcraft based creature that was created by a person who had to do something pretty nasty in order to become this creature. But so the idea has become mainstream, and now lots of different things are called skinwalkers, which really doesn't reflect upon the native legend, which I really can't create, but because it's not my culture. But it feels a bit icky when people use that term
Mm,
so often because it's really not what it's supposed to be.
yeah. And what I really like to look back to is the crazy stories or just stories that don't really make sense over history to now, because now you have a lot of people talking about so many different stories that they want to believe so bad, but it's happened throughout history. I mean, since humans were on earth, just sharing these
Mhm.
stories on
Yeah.
things that might be real and wanting to believe certain things to be real. But one of the most recent things was I mean, if I guess modern history was the Salem witch trials, which happened what, 1600s, or yeah, in the 1600s. And you had these people believing that there were witches, and then
Mhm.
sacrificing them or killing them, executing them because they believed they were witches. And then you had these people trying to blame others for being witches as well, so they
Yeah.
would not be killed.
So that was a very cultural thing. It,
Mhm.
it, it ended up being a socioeconomic issue at play, and there was land involved, or money involved, and people didn't like this person or didn't like that person, or there was a problem with the culture being very repressive, and there was no way to um, uh, express your angst or your fear, your feelings. Or women were suppressed and they weren't allowed to own property or didn't have any power. How would they exert that need for some sort of power in
Mhm.
society? Really, really socially complicated stuff regarding witches and witch trials and witch accusations. And we still see that today in certain parts of the world that aren't as connected with modern culture. People will still blame others for hurting their community or disease or bad weather or something like that, and call them witches. And it's tough to, people will say, oh, well, that's really a backwards society that's still
Mhm.
doing that. No, we kind of still do it today. We still
Mhm.
have those types of beliefs that a certain person is not acceptable in society or should be an outcast. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of human feelings like that. We've always
Mhm.
had them and we might always have them. But the idea of witches isn't interesting because I think at the core, people still have this inkling about what a witch should be or what a witch should look like. But at that time, so many people believed witchcraft was real,
Mhm.
and some people still do today. But I like to think about the idea of so if you're looking at people saying, "Oh, well, all these people are seeing Bigfoot, something must be out there, it must be real." People used to say that about witches. People
Mhm.
used to say that about fairies. People used to say that about dragons. All these things, unicorns, all these things that we now think is antiquated and ridiculous. What's the difference?
Mhm.
Why is Bigfoot not the the big hairy fairy of the woods? What's the difference? It's really, there's not a whole lot of difference here. People are believing these things because it sounds plausible to them, and that's what they accept. But there's really nothing behind it. But it is a lot of sociology involved there in
Mhm.
culture.
Yeah. So, what about the chupacabra? That could also be considered a cryptid, right?
It is, and it's a really fun one.
Mhm.
And that's a good example of the internet being key to promoting these types of beliefs. Earlier, you said that now everybody, the conspiracy theories are all over the place. I think the internet is a real big factor in that. Now we can easily share these ideas, these news stories, these thoughts, and find people across the world immediately who also find that interesting and
Mhm.
pass it on, and the belief grows.
Yeah.
So with the chupacabra, it became popular in the early 90s when the internet was becoming popular, and those stories got spread really quickly. And then it morphed into something else. And it's kind of interesting because, in the beginning, Puerto Rico had a problem with stray dogs
Mhm.
preying on livestock. And then when the chupacabra legend became something else, moved to the United States, what did we end up having? Mangy coyotes or something like that. Dogs that were attacking livestock or canids, I should say. So, there were various ones. There could be foxes or coyotes, but it ended up being a dog problem. But we like to believe that it's something more than dogs because
Mhm.
that sounds better and it sounds more scary and it sounds more like we have a problem. When if it's dogs, it's like, oh well, that's not very enchanting, is it?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's also the media because
Oh, definitely.
we know what they like to do, especially with ghosts and ghost stories. That you have ghost hunters, and this is something that you actually used to look into. Uh, but a lot of these TV shows are just plain reality TV.
Yeah,
There's really not much more to it, b- other
it's
than they,
entertainment. Yep.
yeah, entertainment. They just try to entertain people. And here, I live in Vegas, and here in Vegas, there is the Haunted Museum. So apart from ghosts, they also have artifacts, which is pretty
Cursed.
interesting.
Yeah.
Like cursed
Yeah.
artifacts, they have the devil's rocking chair. Uh,
Right.
they have the Dybbuk box, which is really interesting.
Hmm.
So like a lot of that stuff, I don't even know if it's real apart from it holds a certain energy. And there are people that argue that that's not real, but you feel different. You feel different if you come across those artifacts. I know that I did, but apart from that energy shift, I didn't really experience any paranormal being in that building. But it also seems like it's all in your head, and we get a lot of these stories from people that want something to be real, and when you want something to be real so bad, it becomes real.
Right.
Can that also be a fact?
For sure. People see what they believe.
Hmm.
And that's a good example is the culture, the society gives value to these artifacts based on the stories that we tell about them. Imagine a piece of clothing that was worn by a celebrity, has considerable more value than the same piece of material that was not. Yet we want that and we'll pay more for it just because it's association with something. And I think you're seeing the same thing with those artifacts. If it was associated with a good story or a story that people believe, then they find value in that artifact. If it's has to do with a famous event like a murder or something like that, it ends up being socially valuable. People were collecting stuff from serial killers and things like that.
Hmm.
It's strange way that we place value on things in our society. That is interesting. But to get back to the idea of experiences, and I think there's really good evidence to show that people who believe in ghosts are far more likely to experience something that they're going to call a
Hmm.
ghost or a haunting. There was a couple studies a number of years ago where they set up situations in different rooms, and this was done in the UK. And the people who were volunteers to go through this area were told, okay, now you're going to mark on where you felt something interesting or something different or
Hmm.
bad, good, whatever. And when they got to the end of the survey, they were asked about their beliefs. And when it all shook out, those who were more apt to believe in haunted places were far more likely to have said that they had some sort of experience in those rooms. So clearly, if you're open to having those experiences, you're going to actually feel like you did.
Hmm.
And that's just human nature. You have to be open to see things in the world, or you're going to miss them. So if
Hmm.
you're open to paranormal experiences, you will interpret things differently than a person who is not.
Hmm. Yeah. And
I think you could say that about anything. Um, you know, religious experiences or conspiracy ideas, or people will miss animals going by. They won't know what's in their backyard or right out their door because they're not looking. You have to look, and if you look, you're going to find.
Right. And especially when it comes to religion, because religion tries to fill in the gaps of everything that can't be explained by
Right.
logic, right?
It's a nice framework, yeah, that you could use in your worldview.
Hmm. Yeah. So to me, religion is another thing, another area that is filled with a lot of myths because it just takes certain myths to be mixed in with fact to make those myths seem more real than they actually are. And that's with everything.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a worldview. If religion is your worldview and you believe that a certain entity is constructing the world, that's how you're going to see it. If you
Mhm.
have a scientific worldview, you're going to see things a lot differently. So everybody grows up with the certain framework based on what our families believe, and then maybe you go someplace else in the world and you change your belief system and you see things in a different way. So we're all on our own journey.
Mhm.
And we develop our worldview maybe in pieces. So that the person sitting next to you is not going to see the world the same way that you do.
And that's another interesting thing because then when you have a lot of different worldviews and they exchange information, you get like new stories and new experiences as well.
Sure, yeah, and that's what culture is all about. And
Mhm.
now we have the internet, and those get shared all over the place. So good and bad with the internet, right? We get
Yeah.
we get some interesting things that we could see this wide array of different stories and beliefs. On the other hand, some bad things get propagated. So
Right. And you're able to exchange information with others and then come to a realization that a lot of the information is really similar.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, no other time in history were we able to share things like this across the world, and we could see that somebody else thinks similarly. I don't think there's any. It's hard to say that there's any really new ideas in the world that somebody hasn't already thought of.
Yeah, because
That's what
everything
it feels like.
is it almost seems like everything that has been told has already been told.
It
Like
comes
yeah,
around again. Yeah,
yeah, there are no new experiences. Maybe
it feels that
with
way.
yeah, maybe with AI. I guess with the assistance of AI, we could come up with new stories. But at the end, they're just going to be stories. Uh,
But they're based on what we already know. Because
mhm,
right, what feeds into AI but information that we already know, and
mhm.
we can remix it in new ways.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure that there has been a lot of experiences that just use old experiences to make new experiences.
Sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of how folklore works too.
Hmm.
Just as it goes on, pieces get exchanged and evolve
Yeah. Yeah.
to whatever need we have. Folklore
Right.
evolves to fit that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in new experiences that will come out because I'm sure there are a lot of experiences that I haven't even heard of. But we always have like the popular ones, just like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness
Mhm.
Monster, Chupacabra. There's also this other story that I had came across. I think it's like the Flying Devil. It's some story from the East Coast. It's like this bird that
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So I mean there are a lot of stories, but you're right. They're just stories that have been remixed from
Yeah,
other
and
experiences.
what about the example of like creepypasta when people go on to these websites and create stories completely from fiction?
Hmm.
They're fictional stories, but then give it a little while, and if they get popular, people say they see those things in real life. Like Slender Man was a creepypasta. The Rake was a creepypasta as well, and now people are using those terms to describe what they say they're experiencing in real life. What's that all about?
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
sometimes it gets into the dangerous area because we heard about the Slender Man murder.
Yeah, so people really believe that. And of course those girls were they had some mental problems. they weren't able to tell a truth from fiction. And I think we clearly have people out there who have that problem. Recall the man that believed in the whole pizza cosmic pizza thing, when he ended up going to Washington with a shotgun and going
Yeah.
into this pizza place, Comet Ping Pong, I think it was, and
Hmm.
thinking that that actually was the place where they were abducting children,
Yeah.
and so he really believed that, and that is terrifying,
Yeah.
that we lose touch with reality.
Yeah. It's also interesting because sometimes, as I said, truth gets mixed in with fiction. So there might be some truth to it because, going over through the Epstein files, this
Mm.
fascination with pizza is
Right.
really weird.
It is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am mentioned in the Epstein files, believe it or not.
Oh man.
There was a tangent with Deepak Chopra,
Mhm.
where he was involved with talking about, did not like the skeptical community and what they were saying about him. And I was mentioned because I was involved in the skeptical community at the time that didn't really like the idea of skeptics debunking whatever they were trying to sell at the moment. And that was a time where the skeptics were actively pushing against those types of ideas.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It just seems that, as I said, a lot of truth gets mixed in with
Yeah.
fiction, and
And they'll use those little bits of truth to push the credibility. Well, see, this is true, but then go off on a tangent
yeah.
where it's not true.
Yeah, especially with a lot of people that got mixed into the Epstein files. Like, who knew someone that you? I mean, I'm sure that I've came across a lot of people, or anyone. You don't know what they're up to, uh,
No.
and then just getting mixed in with that group or with anyone,
Yeah.
and now you have a relation with that person. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Well, you don't know. I mean, everybody has their secrets.
Mhm.
You don't always know everything about the person you're dealing with. And sometimes it feels, um, there's, oh, I don't see anything wrong with this. And you don't realize what you're stepping into. We've all had those
Mhm.
experiences where you realize you're um, having a relationship with someone who's probably not a good person. And how do you extract yourself from it?
Mhm.
Yeah, we all have our secrets, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean,
Mm.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, when it comes to stories, just wondering like what stories are real, what stories are not. And, as humans, we just want everything to be spooky and we
Yeah.
want to be entertained.
We
Uh,
want things to be explained too. And if we
mhm.
can't come up with an explanation, we're going to come up with a cool story that helps us deal with it.
Yeah,
Um,
just to put the
yeah.
dots together.
Yes, and just to make us feel better. Whether it's true or not, it makes us feel better in the moment.
Hmm.
And some people like to hang on to those stories because they're precious to them and they don't want to give that up. But we should understand that,
Right.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and accept that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, who knows if any truth is going to come out of fictional stories. We might just wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've had a good time talking
Yeah.
about the cryptids and cryptology. The whole thing.
Yeah.
It's it's really interesting.
Yeah. There's like we were talking about stories is you can look at things a different way,
Mhm.
different lenses to these subjects. That's why, who else was looking at paranormal geology stories. So it's like
Mhm.
we we got to use a little bit of our imagination in the world too,
Yeah.
to and for entertainment and for an escape from the real world that sometimes isn't so great. So
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And where
As long as
can
we keep it down to earth. Yeah, not too
yeah.
crazy.
So where can people read more about your work?
My website is sharonahill.com. It's got a section on spooky geology there. It's got a section on Pop Goes the Cryptid, which is about popular cryptids right now. And sometimes I talk about just general natural anomalous phenomena, which is my favorite topic of all things. Weird lights, weird noises, everything like that.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Nice to have you on.